Okay, thank you everyone for coming. I think I've met most people here before, but for those who don't know me, my name's Ed Bennett, and together with Mark, we lead the research software engineer team at the Swansea Academy of Advanced Computing. So today's user forum is primarily open to the users. So previously it's been a top-down event with delivering information. This time we were hoping to get a feel for the kind of research people are doing with the facilities we have. So thank you all to all the speakers for volunteering to give up 5 minutes to present to us what you've been working on. So quick introduction. We'll then dive straight into the lightning talks. From there, we'll have some details from our sysadmins on what's going on with the equipment refresh. Then some discussion on SA2C moving forward. So what's happening next, and then we are promised that there will be coffee arriving for us to have afterwards over conversations, or other conversations over coffee. So lightning talks, for those of you who have not been to a lightning talk event before, it's, well, the description was in the email, but it's a format where people present their research in a time-constrained environment. So we're allowing 5 minutes for each speaker. There will be an alarm going off after 5 minutes, so please try and stay within that time limit so that we move along nice and quickly. So within 40 minutes, we'll have had all 8 speakers giving their talks. So who was first?
I think I'm first.
You think you're first? Okay. So talking first is Jonas from the Department of Physics, who has some slides over here. He's going to talk to us about studying baryons at high temperature using supercomputers.
Hey, okay. So, this is one of the 2 contributions, I guess, today from the Lattice groups in Swansea. Lattice being a very HPC field in general. So I thought I'd talk a bit about what we do and why this is HPC and why we need HPC. So what we want to study is quantum chromodynamics. So quantum chromodynamics in sort of more normal speak is basically our theoretical description of what we call the strong nuclear force. So it's what holds the quarks together inside of the nucleus and inside the baryons. So, you know, this is an example of a meson. It's basically a quark and anti-quark pair held together by gluons, which are the mediators of this strong force. The problem with QCD compared to QED, quantum electrodynamics, is that quantum electrodynamics is sort of it's a very weak coupling, so it's easy to study theoretically, whereas quantum chromodynamics is very strong, so it's very hard, hence the name strong nuclear force. So what do we do? Oh, let's do this first. Anyway, so one of the things we want to look at, or our group wants to look at, is sort of what happens at finite temperatures and finite chemical potentials, or chemical potential would be sort of the same as density. So here you have how we sort of envision this phase diagram to look like, a phase diagram describing how our theory behaved in different regions. So down here is sort of where normal everyday life is, where we have very low temperatures and like medium valued chemical potentials, and here's where you have baryons as we know them. As we increase temperature, you see that we move into this quark-gluon plasma phase, where all of the baryons melt into this soup, or this plasma, called quark-gluon plasma, and sort of this transition is one of the things we want to study. If we want to look at experimental insight, this is sort of how the different experiments currently running sort of probe this phase diagram. So we believe in the early universe sort of went through this phase diagram on the very low chemical potential axis. At the LHC and at RIC, we sort of probe it at slightly higher chemical potential, but still sort of close to this side here. And then there are new experiments, AIR, which is in Darmstadt, Germany, and Nika, which is in Dubna, in Russia, are trying to sort of probe this phase diagram at much higher densities. The problem is, as I said, solving this theory is very difficult, so what do we do? So we basically say, okay, we can't solve it analytically, so instead we basically discretize space-time, put it on a huge lattice, and run it through a supercomputer. So on this lattice, you will have gluons living on these links, and then you have quarks living on the sides, and they're connected by gluons, and everything is nice and peachy. The problem here is this is the equation we want to solve. So this is a matrix equation, so we want to invert this matrix. And the problem is, as you can see, even though this matrix is it's very sparse, so most of the elements of this is going to be 0, the matrix is still what we call volume times the number of spinors, indices, times the number of colors above a theory in both directions. And we need to solve this matrix equation many, many, many times. And on our low temperature lattices, which are some of the worst ones, or the worst one, we have temporal extent of 256 lattice size, spatial extent of 32 cube, which means that our lattices are basically 100 million by 100 million large. And doing that inversion is therefore very expensive. So this is why we need supercomputers. So what we do then is that we take this huge matrix, we divide them into equal sized blocks, put them on different processes, and then do a lot of iterative methods for doing the matrix inversion. And here, obviously, parallelization is very important. Figuring out how to do communication efficiently is very important. So let's do one more slide on what we do with this, because there are lots of people who do finite temperature lattice QCD. So this is one of the things we study. I should have had a bit more text, but I'll explain anyway. So down here you see T divided by Tc. So Tc is the critical temperature where the phase transition happens. So this would happen here, and this is a low temperature, and this is a high temperature. And R is a measure of the difference between the chirality partners of the elementary particles. So every elementary particle has a parity partner. So they are identical in every sense except parity, which is a quantum number that tells you something about the handedness of the particle I'm going into. But basically, at 1R, that means that the parity partners are very different, and at 0R, they are almost, or they are identical. So we see here, by plotting the mass difference, which is the R value, I'm done very quickly. As you go towards higher temperature, we see that this falls over, and we have sort of a second type of phase transition. And this is what we're looking at. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Jonas. So next is Jack, who's going to talk to us about HPC and high-speed motorboats. So that. Sorry?
That's okay. Just make sure the videos work. Just that.
Oh, enable content or enable content as well.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you, Jack.
Hi everyone, my name is Jack Townsend. I'm an M2A NHD student, and I'm looking at the design and modelling of high-speed motorboats. If you don't know what a high-speed motorboat looks like, this is an example. These are from the X-Cat race. Cat meaning catamaran, so 2 hulls. This is a pretty good example of how the modelling problem in terms of fluid dynamics can be quite complex. So we've got a really complex free surface boundary, being the boundary between the water and the air. And this is particularly difficult to model. This is what makes high-speed boats a different problem to low-speed boats. So low-speed boats work on displacement, so think like a oil tanker, and they're held up mainly by hydrostatic force, so like Archimedes' principle. These are held up by the hydrodynamic force of them slamming into the water and the fluid reacting against the boat. And it can get quite complex in terms of spray, which you can see a lot of there, and also some of the hydrodynamic devices on the boat. You can't see it very well here, but there are basically these discontinuities in the bottom of the hull, here and here, called steps. And what they do is entrain air underneath and reduce the hydrodynamic drag. So that's one of the main things I want to be modelling. Project goals are to model the boat hydrodynamics and deliver a number of specific capabilities. I'm looking at some existing boats, so there's the DB15, WP18 there, and mainly optimising those existing models by making sort of small tweaks. And perhaps the more exciting part is the development of a new boat from scratch using both hydrodynamic and aerodynamic modelling techniques. Unfortunately, I can't show a lot of that, partially because I'm not allowed to, but partially because it's pretty early in development, so it wouldn't be very worthwhile. At the beginning of this project, I had to choose a solver which was appropriate for the problem, and I settled on LBM, lattice Boltzmann method. The main reason for this was its ability to handle the complex boundaries. But the nice sort of HPC-related aspect of it is how appropriate it is for parallelization on large computing clusters. So the particular LBM code I'm using is developed by Palabos, or it's called Palabos. And this is a experiment around the parallelization of it. This is modeling an aneurysm. And you can see 70% parallel efficiency, which is pretty good. The whole simulation is broken down into two aspects here. There's the fluid simulation on the left and the pre-processing on the right. The pre-processing on the right is, you can tell, not as good. The reason this isn't such a big problem is because that constitutes a very small amount of the total runtime. The vast majority of it, 95%, or 99% plus in most cases, is going to be the fluid simulation on the left. So, to demonstrate a few examples of the simulations I've been running, this is an SB90E, which is a Swedish littoral craft. And this was testing out the wave capabilities, basically, but it looked really nice, so I show it off a lot. You can see why I need HPC computing for this. This ran on about 600 cores for about 72 hours. But I did get quite satisfying results from it. This is mainly just to look good. Since speaking to coastal people, I found out that the way my waves work aren't how waves work. Waves are complicated, apparently. Fortunately, though, most of my optimization is going to be done for the very high speed in planing conditions, so very flat sea states. So this is mainly to show off the ability to model the free surface. You'll notice as well the boat's doing very well for that sea state. I haven't got the capability for the boat to react to the forces from the fluid yet. That's something I'm working on now and approaching completion on. These are a few stills from a DB15 simulation. The reason I show these is because when I showed these to industry, they got particularly excited because they said it looks like a boat. It looks like their experience with looking at the wake off the back of a boat. This was a bit more slow speed. I think this was about 15 knots. But these stills are taken from this simulation. Same boat, but the details are not shown there. Again, running on 500 cores for 120 hours, so it wouldn't be feasible to do this on a desktop, which is what has been done with HPC resources. So for the future of the project, it will involve adding that rigid body dynamics and also looking at the aerodynamic optimization. Oh, that's run off there. If you want to know about this, talk to me after because I've run out of time. So.
Thank you very much. So next is Davide Vodola, who is going to talk to us about twins percolation for qubit losses in topological color codes. Did you send a PDF? Or
yes,
PDF. So I need to go back to read up and to go back.
Okay. So I want just to talk about these losses in topological core code, and this topological core code can be used as memories for quantum computers. So quantum computer is a device that works with the law, based on the law of quantum mechanics. It's able to outperform classical computer because let's say the basic unit of the quantum information is the qubit, is the quantum bit that is represented by a kind of superposition of two states. In nature or in labs, these qubits can be realized and they can be found in, for example, in spins of electron, or they can be the two energy level of ions over atoms, or they can be the two polarization states of photons. But the problem is that in lab, realizing a qubit is difficult because in general these systems are coupled to the environment. So magnetic field fluctuation or temperature fluctuation can destroy the state of the qubit. And let's say two are the biggest processes that lead to the erasure of a qubit. One is errors that in general are bit flip or phase flip error. The other kind of damage that can affect a qubit is losses. That's really when a qubit flies out of the trap. Okay. Classically, it's possible to overcome these two problems because classically we can copy. So we have an hard drive, we can do a lot of copies, and if an error happens on one of the classical bit, we can compare with the other and say, okay, maybe that's a mistake, it should be a 1, not a 0. But in quantum mechanics, we cannot do that. Because in quantum mechanics, there's this no-go theorem that forbids the copy of a quantum state. So people had to find another way for solving this problem. And the way was, okay, if we have to store a state psi, we can encode it in more than one qubit. So if a loss or an error happens on some of the qubits, we are anyway, maybe we are lucky enough that we can still recover the information through a decoding procedure, so we can get back the information we had. One of the way for realizing this encoding in the last year has been done with topological codes. This is a kind of big word just for saying that we take a lot of qubits, we put these qubits on a 2D lattice, but this lattice has to have some properties. It should be tricolorable, meaning that there are 3 colors that you can assign to each of the phases, such a way that 2 phases do not share the 2 adjacency phases, they do not share the same color. And the lattice should be trivalent, meaning that each of the qubits in the lattice should have 3 links connecting them. So the question we asked is, okay, how many losses can we afford and still be able to recover the quantum information that was originally stored? And it turned out that this problem is equivalent to a classical problem that is called percolation, that is somehow looking at if there exist paths that connects, I don't know, the left border with the right border of the lattice, or the top border with the with the bottom border of the lattice, as this blue and green path show. The idea is that if we are able to find these 2 paths, we are able to reconstruct the state psi, because it's possible to show that these 2 paths contain the same information that was initially stored in the lattice. So what we did, we somehow tried to find the minimal number of losses that the lattice could afford, and still we were able to find 2 percolating paths in the lattice. The problem is that we need bigger system size, because we want to reach the so-called thermodynamic limit, when there are in principle infinite number of qubits. And we had to simulate, as this is a kind of random process, we had to simulate a lot of patterns of disorder. And this was, APC Wales was helpful in this respect. Just the final result is that these codes are robust. So in principle, one can lose up to the 46% of qubits. And these numbers, that seems too much, but one should think that this number should be compared with the no-cloning theorem, that tells us that one can lose at most 50% of qubits. So this is it's not pretty bad. And yeah, just thanks for listening. Thank you.
Perfect timing. So next is going to be John Walshe, who's going to be telling us about protein modelling with supercomputers. Oops.
Hello. I think we're the only biological application of this today. Most of the rest of you are physicists or something. So work in the protein modelling bioinformatics group in the Department of Life Sciences, looking at the structure of proteins and how we can use supercomputers to help model those. So the background to it, we're familiar with the idea of DNA encoding genetic information. On each strand of DNA there's particular letters along it, and each triplet of 3 letters encodes for 1 amino acid. So the genes will encode a long linear molecule that's a string of amino acids, and then that long string will fold up on itself into a complex 3-dimensional shape. Exactly how that folds up will depend on the sequence of amino acids and what groups they've got on the sides of them. So a long linear molecule folds up into a complex 3D shape that then has shapes on the surface that will interact with other chemicals in whatever biological system it's in, whether those are enzymes that digest food, or whether they're small drug molecules that are going around your body and interacting with the body systems that proteins encoded in that way are sort of the major building blocks of life and how all biological systems work. So we're trying to follow through that system so that we can simulate it in a computer environment rather than having to do experiments in test tubes. So our research on that out of many species of interest, so humans, our genome encodes for about 20,000 proteins in the human genome. And there are many possible variations of each of those. So you've got potentially many tens of thousands of different protein physical structures that you're interested in. Each of those will be a different sequence of amino acids. One specific sequence will always fold up in the same way, but it's not an easy step to be able to tell how a particular sequence will fold up and what shape it will eventually be. And once you've got that structure, you can then pick out where there are interaction sites on the surface of the protein or in pockets within it. So you can then look at how small molecules, or maybe drugs or other toxins potentially in the environment, how those interact with each of those proteins, and you can then cross-reference those with the databases of what those proteins do in a biological context. So the problem quickly expands as you're getting increasingly large data sets. So actually modelling the structure of a protein, modelling the 3D structure, can take hours to days on a reasonably sized node on a supercomputer. So that's the sort of thing that might have been done on a one-off basis on a workstation at one time, but trying to do it across the whole genome of an organism certainly means you've got to try and do that tens of thousands of times, which is one step where HPC computing comes in. Then once you've got that huge set of protein structures, you then want to try and look at how a large library of chemicals will react to them, so you can pick out which proteins are relevant to that drug, or if you've got a protein of interest, which chemicals or which drugs will interact with it. So you've then got perhaps sort of a few minutes for each interaction site to identify where those sites are. And then the next stage of actually docking, of seeing where a small molecule will fit into a large protein structure. That again might take a few minutes or a few CPU minutes, but you're potentially doing that several million times if you've got thousands of chemicals against thousands of proteins. So rather than having a single big problem, as a lot of your cases are, we've generally got a very large number of cases to run. And how to split those up efficiently across a large computer network is interesting. We've been working with HPC, Supercomputing Wales, to optimise that process and get it all running efficiently, and with good results, which we've been starting to develop interfaces for, so those can be presented to the wider community. Okay.
Thank you. So next is Mark Hanna. If I can find. No. So Mark is going to be talking to us about finite element algorithms for solution of the Boltzmann equation.
Okay, thank you. So today I will talk very quickly about what we do. So my name is Mark Hanna, and I work for, I'm an MSc Master by Research student who's doing some explorations in solving an equation that's called the Boltzmann Equation. So the Boltzmann Equation is, let's say in simple words, it's quite a nasty one to solve. It's very complicated. It causes us all types of different problems. And we're really keen to model it and predict what happens using it, because it gives us benefits that other solvers can't really do. So I'll explain a bit what does that really mean. So for example, the Boltzmann equation is a more generic form of the Navier-Stokes. So in other words, it can do things that other continuum methods would fail to do. So it can see things at a very molecular level. So things like molecular collisions, those are things that the Boltzmann equation can resolve, but others can't. So the thing is, now if you look at the top equation, it's a function not only of space and time, it's also a function of velocity. That means when we need to discretize the space, we also need to discretize velocity as well. So that really has got some very harsh implications in terms of performance requirements. So for example, if we have a mesh, where, for example, modeling a spaceship, we're entering the atmosphere, this mesh has got around 28,000 elements. So in a normal equation, we'll have 28,000 degrees of freedom. The problem with this is that every single mesh point will have another 6,400 velocity space mesh on top of it. So when we do the multiplication of the number of elements, the number of points, and the number of velocity nodes, we get a 91 million degrees of freedom. And that reflects how demanding that is. So trying to solve this is really demanding. And that's where HPC Wales or Supercomputing Wales comes in really handy. So by doing so, we were able to do these predictions and to do these very highly demanding simulations. And that's one big sign of how beneficial that could be. Another thing that we are really keen about when we work with Supercomputing Wales is the support we get. So that we do some collaboration, which really helps us to actually take this from pure theory into a more practical and more commercial perspective. So we try and find different ways to do parallelizations for it, and by doing so, we can potentially take this into a more doable, actually a more commercial solver that can be used in the real world. And that's what I've been doing, and thank you.
So next, Simon Hans is going to talk to us about critical behaviour in the 2+1 dimensional Thirring model with domain wall fermions.
Great.
And I just need to make sure I've got the up-to-date versions of this. Second from the bottom. Oh, I see. There we go. So I can download that. Open.
Thank you, Okay, I don't have much time. So I like Jonas, I work in the lattice field theory group in the physics department at Swansea. This is a project using the similar techniques, but in a different physical context. So I'm going to talk about the problem of electrons moving in a plane in 2 dimensions, and they're relativistic. And what that means is not that they move with the real speed of light, but they simply have a relation for their energy which is linear in their momentum. It's what's called a linear dispersion relation. These models, the main motivation is coming from condensed matter physics. There's a list of very impressive sounding systems where they might be relevant. The one which people may have heard of is graphene, which is a 2-dimensional sheet of carbon. Okay, now I'm actually going to apply what's called a quantum field theory to describe this. Already it looks very forbidding. There's 2 different versions of the main equation at the top. It's called the Thirring model. It's an interesting model theory. I won't bore you with why it's interesting. The main feature I'm going to focus on is its potential to exhibit something called spontaneous symmetry breaking. That is that the ground state, or the vacuum of this theory, could actually be populated by many, many bound pairs of fermions with antifermions. And that means that a particle propagating through that ground state would actually get a spontaneously dynamically generated mass. And the signal for this happening is written in the equations. This quantity is called the bilinear condensate, and it goes from 0 to being non-zero. Now the theory says that this could happen as long as the coupling, the strength of the interaction is large enough, it's bigger than some number, and also if the number of different fermions in the model is smaller than some number. And what I'd really like to do at the moment is work out what this critical number is. It turns out that the determination of this number is a very difficult problem. It's what's called a non-perturbative problem in quantum field theory. That means we need to use Supercomputing Wales. Okay? So, just to give you an idea, here's a diagram of what the answer might look like. The coupling constant is getting stronger as I move to the left, and the number of flavors is increasing. So if n is small and g is large, I'm in this region where the symmetry is broken. And if the opposite is the case, I'm in this different region, this different phase, where the symmetry is restored. And if you like, you could think of these different phases as being like a conducting phase and an insulating phase. In this case, we found that the critical number of flavors is about 6.6. So that was a big success. In fact, if you'll see, this is not new work. This work was done when the director of SA2C was a PhD student. It's an interesting result, but it's not the correct one because the model I'm using, the so-called staggered model, doesn't have the correct symmetries. So what I've been trying to do in recent years is build a model which has the correct symmetries, and I'm using something called domain wall fermions. And the basic idea is crazy. You actually introduce an extra dimension into the model called the LS, so that the physics of the plane that I'm trying to simulate is actually just two ends of like a big donut. And you can actually formulate the model so that everything that's interesting is happening on the planes, but in order to get the correct symmetries, you actually have to extend the model all the way around the donut. And the even worse news is that you only get the correct symmetries in the limit where the two ends are brought a long, long way apart. It's as if you think of the two ends as being like two ends of an accordion. It's when you squeezed it, or you've pulled it apart as far as it'll go. So I need to do simulations of this model in this limit. How am I doing? Oh my goodness. Okay. So right. In that case, it turns out that when I measure this chiral concept, thing I'm interested in, it's very sensitive to the distance between the two ends. And in fact, you have to work very hard and do an adventurous extrapolation to go to that limit. So that's what I've been learning about most recently. And well, this is the answers. The current state of the answers is actually generated the plot this week. So all of these examples here are for relatively weak values of the coupling. This is the condensate, and you can see that as I make the bare mass of the fermion small, the condensate vanishes linearly. So in this case, it's likely to be no symmetry breaking. However, the very strongest coupling that you can look at, a much more interesting curve, which is tentatively the signal I'm looking for. So if this is the case, it means that the critical number is actually bigger than 1. I've also found, incidentally, that it's less than 2. So it's very hopeful and interesting sign. But in order to make this, turn this from a tentative conclusion to being a major result in quantum field theory, I need much better code, Ed. And I need a lot more cores. Thank you.
So next is, can I close the Adobe Reader? That's Colin. Yeah, so next Colin is going to be telling us about data-intensive research at Aberystwyth University. Sorry?
He's going after me, yeah? Hi, I'm Colin Sauze. I'm a research software engineer on Supercomputing Wales at Aberystwyth University. I did invite everyone else at Aber to come along with me today, but nobody wanted to come. So I'm just going to present a very quick overview of the HPC and data-intensive research that we do. And not all of this uses Supercomputing Wales, but more of it probably will in the future. If any of you haven't heard of where Aberystwyth is, we're in the middle of nowhere, about 2 hours north of here. We've got about 10,000 students, about half the local population, a very small seaside town. And our main research departments are in computer science, physics, maths, geography, biology, and actually international politics, but they haven't done much on computing yet. So just going through the areas that we do, we've got a lot of people in geography doing remote sensing. In computer science, there's a lot of computer vision. There's an awful lot of bioinformatics going on, and related to that is the high throughput plant phenotyping. And then within physics, there's several areas, although their computational needs are a bit smaller. And finally, in the maths department, there is a group modelling aqueous phones. The remote sensing group in the geography department are one of our biggest users of Supercomputing Wales. I think at one point they were accounting for about 20% of the data being stored. And they do things like collecting data from the Sentinel satellite and trying to work out the total biomass of all of the mangrove forests on Earth. And they're now trying to apply this to quite a few other species and other areas, looking at things like deforestation. They also have another group who are into how terrain evolves, and they're currently trying to work this out for Mars, with a load of simulations of how Martian terrain might have evolved into its current state. And they're also getting into drone imagery and much higher resolutions and trying to process that, stitch those together, and extract features from them. The computer vision group in computer science do a lot of medical imaging work, looking at X-ray images or MRI images from people with cancer. So they've done a lot of work on breast cancer and on prostate, trying to automatically identify it. They're very keen to get onto the new GPU systems when they come online and apply some deep learning techniques to them. The bioinformatics group do a lot of work with gene sequencing. They've also got into using very small gene sequences that can be taken to unusual places. They've been sequencing the bacteria in a coal mine and quite a lot in the Arctic recently. We have a lot of interest in breeding up crops as well. If any of you have eaten oats today, good chances are that Aberystwyth University actually develops the strain of oats that you ate. We've developed about 65% of the oats eaten in this country. And also related to that is a lot of grasses, miscanthus, which is a very good energy crop, and they're trying to optimize that for growing in really harsh conditions where you can't grow anything else and maximizing its yield. There's also a lot of work on rumen systems, so cows and sheep, and parasites and drug development for combating parasites. Sort of as a side to that, we have the high throughput phenotyping, which is where we're looking at the physical traits of a plant. This is my previous job was working here, and they're doing automated imaging of plants and trying to extract features from them, work out their heights, sizes, how green or yellow they are. And more recently, they've been trying to do some 3D imaging, putting plants through CT scanners to see seeds developing inside them before they've actually grown out. So these black and white images are from the CT scanner. And also moving this out to the field and taking images of plants in the field and doing the same kind of analysis to them. In the physics department, we have a large group doing solar physics, looking at things like chemical composition of exoplanets, a lot about how the magnetosphere and the ionosphere work and how space weather and coronal mass ejections will interact with our own atmosphere. There's also a materials group who've got a much smaller project looking at some glassy materials for use in space applications. And finally, in the maths department, we have a group who are into simulating the properties of foams and sort of quite non-viscous liquids. And they've done a lot of evolving of surfaces, trying to work out how one object will move through a different type of foam. And this has applications in food production, in medicine, and in oil extraction. And finally, that hasn't quite formatted right. If you'd like to collaborate with any of these people, there's a list of most of them on that. There should be another couple that have come off the bottom. If anyone wants to talk to them, there's the core email addresses of the heads of those groups. I can send that around. Are we putting the slides up online? Or?
Put the slides up.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's thank all of the speakers again. So yeah, thank you everyone for staying within the spirit and keeping so well to time. I now need to reopen the slide deck. So next, we're going to have a quick update on the status of the equipment refresh, which is imminent from Gareth, one of our infrastructure team.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the talks. They were very interesting to see because we spend so much time dealing with the physical kit. It's nice to see how it's being used to do actual research. So I'm Gareth Jones. I'm one of the system administrators. Ian Morris at the back is my colleague who works with me. Ian worked for the last 5 years on the HPC Wales kit. I've kind of arrived recently to work on the HPC Wales kit and the transition to the Supercomputing Wales kit. So we're getting a lot of new equipment to replace the HPC Wales kit. We've given that group of equipment a name at Swansea, Sunbird. We've got a lovely logo, which I'm very proud of, produced by Ed. So the actual hardware, we went through a tender process. That was the result of that was that a company called Atos, working with Dell, won the tendering process to provide all the new equipment. The actual equipment they're going to provide is going to be just under 5,000 cores of Intel's Xeon Gold Skylake 6148 processors. It's about 122 nodes. There's 2 chips on each node, 40 cores in total, with 376 gig of RAM. We've got 8 NVIDIA V100, the data center GPUs. They're quite big GPUs, so I think they're going to be quite popular going forward with people like machine learning and those type of applications. All that's going to be, we're going to have just over a petabyte of high-speed Lustre storage, and the interconnect for all that will be Mellanox, which runs at 100 gigabits, 2-to-1 blocking. We've also got a Boolean OpenStack solution, which is essentially a small OpenStack relative to some OpenStack solutions, but it's a small introductory OpenStack solution that we've bought through Atos, which there's a lot of memory, a lot of disk, and we can use all the traditional OpenStack applications, but we're kind of open to see how researchers use that. I'm not quite sure how it works out. So as far as data migration, because the way things have transpired now, the Cardiff system, which has been called Hawk, which is another set of kit very similar to old Dell, a little bit bigger than Swansea's, but that's been installed now in Cardiff University, and that's up and running, fully functional pretty much, but going through something called acceptance testing with Cardiff University, Supercomputing Wales, and the company Atos. That's just about to conclude, and Hawk will, in the next few weeks, hopefully be taking on the Cardiff and Bangor users, which it will be serving. The data then, users will be migrated from HPC Wales into Hawk, the appropriate users, and the same rules apply as far as data is concerned. Then, in the data from HPC Wales will be moved to the new systems, but in a read-only way, so that you can copy it to the new storage to keep safe any data you want to keep. Scratch, the important thing to note, Scratch storage, it's not storage, it's not an archive of any sort, so you shouldn't be storing any data on there that you're not using, working on at the moment, but that data needs to be moved off Scratch, because that's not going to be safe when we decommission the kit. In terms of timelines, so Cardiff, as I just mentioned, is imminent, and the kit is all there, physically there, up and running, and the users are about to be migrated. The Swan, so that's Hawk's. Sunbird, which is in Swansea, will host the Aberystwyth and Swansea users. That is going to be physically delivered and started to be installed the week of the 2nd of July, so the week before the 25th of June. From that week onwards, we're going to be decommissioning a big proportion of the HPC Wales kit. So the number of cores on there is going to drop. It's all going to be high risk. It could go down at any moment, potentially because of all the activity in that room and during that time. So from 25th of June onwards is a very high risk period for the HPC Wales kit in Swansea. And not just high risk, a lot of it will be turned off. So that we're going down from about 5,000 cores to about 2,000 cores. Then after that week, that's happening so that we can make rack space essentially for the new kit. So after that week, on the week commencing the 2nd of July, that's when we're going to take delivery and install the new Sunbird Dell kit. That will take then around about a week to physically install. The company will be installing it for us. Once they've installed it, there's a lot of acceptance tests and transitioning tests that they go through in order to pass it on to us. That's going to start around the 9th of July and then take up until, dependent on a number of unknowns, around about the beginning of August. And at that point then, hopefully we can start migrating all of our user community onto the new kit. So we'll communicate all this via email as well, so you've got some dates to work through. But the important message is that the new kit is really, really imminent now after talking about it for a number of months. And the data, obviously, if you want to archive and keep it safe, it's important that you move anything off scratch, and then that you move any data from the old HPC Wales storage, which you'll have access to the new storage. There will be quotas on the new storage as well, so you're going to have to only move data which you need to keep on the HPC facility. It's not an archive, it's a storage solution as such. Okay, any particular questions on the hardware? Yes?
Is the old HPC Wales kit disappearing permanently, or is it still going to be available to use now?
So there is potential that we will keep a proportion of it online. Swansea University is taking ownership of the HPC Wales kit now. So it's not technically HPC Wales kit now, it's Swansea University kit. So that is an option. We got, obviously it costs a lot of money in terms of power and cooling to keep it online. So it's an option. I'm not 100% sure yet what we're going to do with all that. But it's all sort of support as well. So there's a number of issues with keeping it online. Do you foresee a reason to keep it online or to use it?
I was just wondering what the sort of capacity levels would be.
Yeah, no, it certainly won't be connected to Sunbird, so there'll be no connection to it. Even if we do keep it online, the interconnects are not compatible and stuff like that. Any other questions on the hardware? No? Okay.
I think I also know most of you, but if anyone doesn't know me, I'm Mark, who I mentioned earlier. I'm involved leading the research software engineer team. So quickly, well, I know we've been sitting down for quite a while, so thank you very much for turning up. I want to echo Ed's thanks for the talks earlier. They're all fantastic and very, very accessible. Even I understood most of them, which is saying quite something. So just quickly run through a few things that may change and a few things that we're going to think about going forward. The first is how we award the research software engineer time. So most of you are probably aware we've got a research software engineering team at Swansea, which are a team of software engineers who are available to help you with your research, and I know there are many people in the room who've taken advantage of that and who've had some help from us. Going forward, we're thinking of piloting a slightly new approach where we will have a call for applications for RSE time. Hopefully this will be in many ways a better way of doing things, but that's as of yet to be determined. We're expecting to announce the first call relatively imminently, and we'll try and make it relatively lightweight so it's not too, you don't have to go through reams and reams of paperwork just to get a little bit of help. And if successful, and if it proves to be a good fallback and a good way of doing things, a good way of allocating resource, we may continue to do this in the future. So that's one thing to quickly mention. The other is where SA2C is going to move from here, so how we're going to move forward. We'd like for lots of the directions and lots of the changes and things, lots of the suggestions to come initially from you, the users. So from the user forum, from the people in this room, from the people on the user forum or the SA2C user mailing list. So we'd really like for that to be the driving force behind what we do. But that will feed into several committees. So there's going to be, in terms of governance, we're going to get a little bit more, a bit heavier, as it were. There'll be three main committees. I reworded the way that this is worded in the official documentation to make it sound a little bit more, to make it a little bit more palatable. But fundamentally, we have a research committee, so ensure the quality of research and the sustainability. We've got a technical committee to look over to oversee the technical aspects of things and decide on maybe directions in terms of technical, in terms of the equipment, etc. And then a delivery committee to ensure that all of the objectives that we have, all of the things that we're trying to do to make research better at Swansea and in South Wales, or in all of Wales, sorry. So to ensure that those have been met. So there will be some users. So yourselves, essentially, also sitting on these committees, or there will be an opportunity for users to be sitting on all 3 of these committees. There'll be an election process, so there'll be initially a nomination followed by, if necessary, an election process for all of that. So we'll be sending emails out imminently for these 2 things, so please keep an eye out if you're interested in either. We'll send initially for self-nominations. I think we thought it would be simpler than nominating and getting the individual to agree. If you think you want to and you think you're a suitable person, we will soon be sending out an email calling for nominations for the committees. Then, if there is need, if there's a sufficient number of applications, we will then hold some elections, which we'll again do on the mailing list to keep things nice and simple. And also keep an eye out for the call for applications for RSE time if you have any projects that you think are interested or projects that you think would benefit from having a software developer work with you. And as a final point, obviously, if we're keeping out 3 emails, make sure you're on the mailing list. If you're not, please come and talk to myself, Ed, or Gareth today, and we can make sure that you are. Fantastic. And I think that is it. Thank you for your patience. Thank you so much to all of the speakers for their fantastic contribution. And I believe there's some coffee that has arrived that we'll set up shortly. So thank you very much.